Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us at 61st edition of Krakow Film Festival. Here we have another great guest of our festival, Kevin MacDonald, Oscar winner in the year 2000. Today we're going to talk about his latest project, the project that is called Life in a Day 2020. Kevin, this is the film that actually it's like the sequel of your film from 2010 that was called Life in a Day. I am just curious what happened that you decided to make another story, that you returned to this project, that you decided to make like a postscriptum to the project from 10 years after.
Well, first of all, it's very nice to be back in Krakow, even if virtually. We showed Life in a Day, the original Life in a Day, there 10 years ago. And I remember that being a lot of fun. It was probably in 2011, so exactly 10 years ago. And I remember showing it in a huge cinema, and it was one of the best screenings we had of the film. So it's nice to be back. As soon as we made the first film, we started talking about making another one, making a sequel, but we never got around to it. You know, we never got organized really to do it. And then at the beginning of last year, the producer, Jack Arbuthnot, phoned me up, and it was just after lockdown had happened in the UK. And he said, oh, I think we should do a sequel to Life in a Day this year because it's the 10th anniversary. And I said, yeah, but it's going to be locked down and COVID, it's going to be very boring. And he said, no, COVID will be finished by July. It'll be over. It's only going to be a couple of months. Don't worry. Little did we know that a year later, here we are. We're still stuck in the COVID world. But actually, of course, it's one of the things that makes this film interesting is that it is filmed during COVID. I think now I want to make another one of these every 10 years. If YouTube will pay for it and help us organize it, I think it's a really good, it's a bit like 7 Up, the famous 7 Up British TV series, you know, it followed children every 7 years, that's still going on, that Michael Apted did. So we could do something like that with this concept of Life in a Day, just a snapshot of the world every 10 years.
It's really incredible how much the world has changed in only 10 years. I was like completely surprised, even in terms of how technology improved since there. Like watching Life in a Day 2020 and comparing it with Life in a Day 2010, you can see that actually right now, the footage that you received is completely different. Like people became like their own director. They have the sense of using the camera. They have the sense of putting the camera to make the better shot and etc. etc. It's really incredible that we all became like filmmakers.
I think that's absolutely true. I think we saw the beginning of that back in 2010, but you got to remember that back then Instagram didn't really exist as far as I'm aware. YouTube was a very different place. YouTube was where people uploaded like home videos and pictures of their babies biting their finger, there was a famous, you know, or their pets or things. You know, it was a very different, very innocent version of the internet back then. And the whole idea of presenting yourself to the world in the best possible light, the sort of, you know, Instagram look, that didn't exist at all. So yeah, we're much more self-conscious around the camera, much more conscious of being filmmakers. And that in some ways that, you know, I think is a problem in the film. You know, sometimes you feel like it's a little, people are too self-conscious sometimes, but other times, you know, it really works. So with the couple who are trying to have a baby in America, this, you know, really works. I think with the little girl in Russia who's milking the goats, you know, this is obviously filmed by her parents, and, you know, it's a real film. They're obviously filmmakers, or they, you know, they know a lot about film. So, you know, sometimes it's a good thing, but I would say that we got 3 times as much footage this time. We got 15,000 hours, but actually probably the quality was a little less good. There was a lot of people, teenagers sitting in their bedrooms, sort of posing for Instagram shots and sort of, you know, thinking that would be interesting if they told us about their troubles with their mothers or something, you know, their boyfriend didn't understand them or something. You know, there was quite a lot of that kind of stuff. But I think it'll be fascinating in 10 years to see how that relationship with the camera has shifted even more in 10 years' time.
I was curious, I'm curious if you would agree with my fees that actually I believe that thanks to that we have this camera, that they are all around us all of the time, and we have social media nowadays. I think that Life in a Day 2020 is like people in Life in a Day 2020, they are more open about what they want to share with the world. They are more open to talk about their inner life, about their emotions, about what they are going through than people 10 years ago. I'm just curious if you would agree with that.
I think that's probably true. I think that's probably true. But I also think that that's got something to do with COVID. Mm-hmm. Because I think with COVID, people became very reflective and people thought about the important things in life. They thought about life and death, obviously, and they thought about, you know, the meaning of life, the philosophy of life, because of the COVID situation. I think it focused people's minds.
Gotcha. You know, were there a lot of people that sent the videos? Again, we know from the film that actually you put few of these people, like the mother that lost her son. Yeah, it's really a tragic story. But did they try to get in touch with you? Did they try to convince you to use their footage again to be on the screen again?
Yes, I actually got in touch. I sent an email to all the people whose emails I still had from the original film and said, please take part. And so we probably had 20 or 30 people from the original one who filmed things. And I decided that most of it wasn't that interesting. And I decided I didn't want to put in anything just for the sake of having it in there, you know, just because to say, oh, look, here's this person again. If you remember them from the first one. The only time I broke that was with the Japanese boy, because in the first film, he's the sort of star of that film in a way. His moment where you realize his mother's dead and he's living on his own with his father. And now I thought, well, people who know the first film will really love to know that his father has remarried and he's got a stepsister. And so I thought there was actually a narrative reason to have him. Of course, most people who have seen the film, I think there's now 16 million views on YouTube. So most people who've seen the film have never seen the first one. I don't know what percentage have seen the first one, but that's a little Easter egg, as they call it, for the people who have seen the first one. But I think if I did it again in 10 years' time, I would do the same thing. I would try and have a few people to create a connection that goes on.
As you said, the great Easter egg. Kevin, we apparently have no idea how the other footage looked like, but I have to ask you something that I am really curious about. What people are eager to share with you as the director? Something positive, something good, or something negative, something bad? What they want to express, something that actually...
Well, I think that's one of the differences between this film and the original one. In the original one, it was definitely more positive and maybe more naive seeming. And that's maybe the times. Partly 2010 was a simpler time. You know, we didn't have Donald Trump and the return of right-wing politics all over the world. We didn't have the same divisions.
But in the other hand, we have the economical crisis from 2008, and we started to feel...
Yes, but I think we were coming out of that. We were coming out of it. But I think that it's also maybe the people who took part in the first one tended to be younger because they were early adopters of the technology of YouTube and this kind of thing. But I think there's no doubt that you feel in the second film that the world is a darker place. Not only have you got COVID and its consequences, and you've got Black Lives Matter and Trump and all of this going on, which I think you feel that sense of division in the world much more in the second one. And I think that in general, I would say that we got a lot of very depressing, very dark material in the second one. In the first film, you know, I had to search very hard to have any dark material because the film was all so light and happy and joyful and fun and people were out in the world. And I felt it was like too happy, too artificial feeling. And I searched for bits of sort of darkness. This time it was the other way around. I had to take out, I had so many stories and people crying, confessing things, discussing death, mortality. In the first film, nobody talked about death, really. In the second one, almost so many of the good stories were about death and suicide and all sorts of things like that. So there's definitely a feeling that people's mental state is darker in 2020.
But maybe it's also about the fact that 10 years ago, the subject of the death, the subject of like being absent here was something that we were escaping from, something that we were trying to skip and don't think about. And right now,
yes, that's also possible. That's also possible that COVID meant that in the last year we've had to confront mortality and be quiet and still. The first film is much more kinetic because you have people doing parkour, you have people doing skydiving, although we have that also in the second one. You have people surfing, you have all these things, and in a way you feel like it's people showing you all the exciting things they're doing, all the exciting places they're going. Whereas this film, of course, because of COVID, is much more interior anyway. You know, and again, we had to struggle to find things that took us outside and into the wider world.
Gotcha. And actually, how did you feel? I mean, how did you feel emotionally when you were soaking up with all of these private negative stories that people wanted to share with you? Was it a hard experience for you?
There were times when it was quite hard and quite depressing. But to be honest, overall, both of these films I've taken away from them a real feeling of connection with humanity, because that's what the films express ultimately, and why I love them so much is that they express our similarities, our connection with all other people on earth. You know, that we're not thinking about nationalism, we're not thinking about gender, we're thinking that we're all people having experiences, and we can relate to most of the experiences that people are having. So it makes you think, oh, that could be me. That could be me. I understand that. And even though that person is in Indonesia and that person's in Russia, I feel like that I'd share those feelings. And I think that sense that we are all very similar is something really good to be reminded of. And I think when you watch this film, I end up with I find it very emotional watching the film. And I find it's a kind of pure emotional connection. There's no story. There's just a connection to lots of people, and you feel some joy and you feel some real sadness, and you feel the sense of mortality that weighs over all of us, and how we combat that sense of mortality. And I think there's something very profound in the experience. It's not philosophical. It's not intellectual. It's emotional.
Actually, I have very similar emotions and thoughts when I was watching your film for the first time during the virtual edition of Sundance Film Festival.
Yes.
That's actually my thought that COVID situation, it made us like totally equal all over the world. Doesn't matter the color skin, doesn't matter the gender, doesn't matter the sexuality or the place that we were born. And that was something that I definitely took out from your film.
Good. Well, I think that's definitely what I feel. I mean, it's been very interesting, the critical reaction to this film, which has actually been very similar to the reaction to the first film. The first film, the intellectual critics really didn't like it, and the same with this one. The intellectual critics don't like it at all because they want to be told something. They want to have this is what it's about. But actually, this film is not about that. It's about what you as an audience member pull from it, and how it touches you, it relates to you. It's pure emotion. And I think that's very difficult for critics to handle, actually. And so I was surprised that, because the first film now has got a reputation in the documentary world as it's a bit of a turning point, a bit of a sort of landmark in documentary, new kind of documentary. But at the time, it was really hated by the critics. And the same thing, they reacted the same way this time. But I think with even more resentment to the film, because it was during the time of COVID, that somehow they felt it wasn't serious enough. You know, that actually in the time of COVID, we should really be talking about the most serious things, or talking about, race and representation and these intellectual ideas. But this film kind of goes beyond that. It's addressing all of those issues, but in a purely emotional way.
Don't worry, maybe when you will make the third part, they're gonna understand something more and write positive.
Well, I found it I found it very interesting because I thought that actually the same, it made me really understand the way that the limitations of critics, and that maybe these films are made for exactly the opposite things that most critics are trying to judge.
That's really interesting. Kevin, before I let you go, I have to ask you about the question that we absolutely cannot avoid. Like, how did you manage with the editing of all of these footages? It seems to be like the impossible work to do.
Yeah, well, you know, I have a huge team of people who help me. And they do, you know, more of the work than I do in a way. Because there's a team of, maybe at this time we had about 50 or 60 people who were around the world who spoke lots of different languages, who viewed the material first. And that's very boring work because they have to watch like all the Polish clips, and they know that 1 in 100 is interesting. And they've got to watch them and log down what the content is, and, you know, the good bits and what colors are used. They've got to log all of that into a database. And every now and again, they come across something really good, and they've got to be prepared for that. And then, you know, they give that 5 stars, and then I will watch those bits. I will watch all of the 4 stars and 5 stars. We mark, you know, from 1 star to 5 stars, and I watch the 4 and 5 stars mostly. And so those people have, you know, it's a huge amount of credit to them. We call them the loggers. And then I had 3 editors on this film. Last time I only had 1 editor, but we decided that there was just too much material for 1 editor. So I had 3 editors, and actually I was worried that that might be a difficult thing, but actually it worked very well. And we all really agreed on what was the good material. And so we watched together, the editors and I watched maybe 200 hours, still a lot of material. And we would watch it together and make notes or fast forward through things as boring. And we were watching it together, but online, you know, on Google Meets. We would watch, so because we were all in our own homes. And then I would say to each editor, okay, will you cut a sequence with this bit? And will you cut a sequence with this bit? And then we put it all together, and then they swapped. And one editor would do something that the other editor had done. So it was a real collaboration with the editors and myself, you know, which was fascinating. I'd never worked like that before. And actually I really enjoyed it, and it suited the nature of this material.
Gotcha. So this is definitely something that they call the teamwork. And Kevin, last one question I have for you is the question about what we talked at the beginning. We agreed that how we use technologies has changed for 10 years. How we are aware of the camera also has changed for 10 years. But you also, as the director, have changed for these 10 years. So watching life in a day.
Very great.
Watching life in a day from 2010, from today's perspective, what would you change? What are your thoughts? Do you see it completely different than you saw it 10 years ago?
Of course, but that's the beauty of it. And, you know, as a director, usually when I make a film, whether it's a fiction film or a documentary, for a long time, I don't really like the film. I'm dissatisfied with it when I finish it, and I don't want to watch it. But with these films, I enjoy watching them because it's not my work in a way. You know, it's this collaboration with thousands of people. And I think I enjoy watching these films. I enjoy making them, and they're enormously pleasurable to make, actually. But I wouldn't change anything because that film represents who I was 10 years ago. It represents the world 10 years ago. And I do think it's a time capsule. You know, that's what's so fascinating about, you know, maybe revisiting this again in 10 years, then another 10 years, that, you know, you can see how humanity's attitudes are shifting, how certain things are probably staying the same, but other things are shifting, and our relationship with technology is certainly shifting. So I wouldn't change anything about it. But I do have, when I watch both of the films, I have a great sense of gratitude to all the people who are generous enough to share their lives, because it's not a small thing to film the intimate things in your life and share them with somebody you don't know. And, you know, you have no idea whether your material will make it into the film. You have no idea if I'll even watch it. you know, it might end up being put at the bottom of a pile. Somebody doesn't like. So, you know, it's this whole project is reliant on the generosity of all the amateur filmmakers who take part.
Gotcha. Kevin, thank you so much for making this film. Thank you so much for finding the time to talk about it. And apparently I keep my fingers that we're going to see each other face to face at the next edition of Krakow Film Festival. And remember what you promised us, that in 10 years, we're going to see the third part of Life in a Day.
I hope so. And I'd love to come back next year and bring maybe another film. Who knows?
We're waiting for you here. Thank you so much, Kevin. Take care.
Thanks so much. Nice to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.